welcome back to the third block of SSR. It's the final block, so we're in the home stretch. I hope you're doing well. I hope you did okay on the exam. As usual, it will take a couple of days, a week or so, for the grader to grade the exam, after which we'll still have to do the analysis. Sharon and I will look at the individual questions and how they did. The sound quality is bad. I'm getting now from the chat, which is weird because I haven't changed anything. I don't have problems. It's okay for me. Fine. Okay, sure. Thanks. Yeah, so just to reiterate, we'll still need to check results. We can only start doing that once the exams have been graded, and that will still take a week or so. And then we'll look at the questions and we'll make adjustments where necessary, including on the open questions or the fill in the blanks questions. I already saw and looked at the results of one specific student, and I saw that even using a comma instead of a period would mean you have the likelihood question wrong. Of course, you're not necessarily wrong, so I will check for those types of weird stuff in a week or so. So even though you got the fill in the blanks question wrong as it stands now, it could still be correct in a week or so. All right, so I hope you did well on the exam, and we're about to get started with the third block of SSR. Today we're going to talk about causality, and in a similar way we're going to apply our critical thinking skills in this block to different aspects, different steps in reasoning about, well, psychological theories, psychological concepts. So basically the stuff you're probably most interested in, right? So you want to better understand human beings, people around you, or be better able to help them. And you want to do proper research on it, but it doesn't really mean just rejecting null hypotheses and looking at p-values and comparing them with alpha levels. Now, of course, it means that you want to draw some conclusions about the stuff you're interested in. So what causes what, and how is this concept related to another concept, right? What does make people feel bad, and how can I improve on that? So actually reasoning about psychological concepts, psychological constructs, using on the basis of your research on your data. All right. That's basically what we're going to do this block, applying your critical thinking skills to all the steps involved in getting from your theory, formulating your theory, comparing it to others, setting up a research hypothesis, deriving a statistical hypothesis from that, testing that hypothesis, and getting all the way back again to your initial assumptions. And there are multiple steps involved, and of course a lot of those steps you've already covered with Dylan in the first year, and we're going to basically talk in this block about some additional challenges. One way of thinking about this or looking about this, and this is my favorite metaphor, I hope I haven't told you about this in the past before, is that back in the day when somebody, I'll keep this a very general description of the invention, well, somebody invented the telescope, that person thought, oh, this is a good tool, this is a great tool, you can use it to see the moon up close. So he gave it to people to check. He said, well, here's a new tool, a new way of gathering data, if you will, and he invited people to look at the moon, an object they were familiar with, and now they were able to see it up close. And people were confused because the moon looked differently from what they expected, right? If you're not used to looking at the moon close up, you might be used to seeing it as a, pure white ball, right? There's none of these markings you can see here in this image, or these weird spots on it, dark spots on it. So what people thought when using the telescope for the first time, they thought, well, there's something wrong with this thing, right? It doesn't allow you to look at distant objects as if they were close. No, there must be some optical defect because the moon doesn't look like the moon should look. So there's clearly something wrong with your instrument. What this example shows is that there's always a decision you need to make as a researcher, right? So If your observation, the way the moon looks up close, doesn't accord with your initial assumptions, the way it used to look to you before using the telescope, you need to decide, well, basically my assumptions are wrong, or perhaps I did something wrong in my research. The telescope is broken. And that's a basic challenge, the central challenge actually for this block. How do we make those steps from our initial assumptions to new data and back again? And how can we go wrong in taking those steps? And how can we be as critical as possible when taking those steps? We're still talking about bending over backwards to show how we're maybe wrong, not only in our statistical analysis like we did in the past block, but now in multiple steps in reasoning about our data. All right. So, yes, and that means bending over backwards means we need to go beyond just checking for significance, right? That should be clear on the basis of the previous block, is that we're not just checking, well, was it a significant result or not, because now we know what limited importance that fact actually is. Whether something is significant or not doesn't tell us, well, not a lot basically about the assumptions we're actually trying to test or the conclusions that we would like to draw. So we need to move beyond that. It's not just about the rejection or the acceptance of the statistical hypotheses. It's also about how you reason before that, leading up to those statistical hypotheses, and what you do after that, after you've drawn your conclusions about the statistical hypotheses, like the null. To drive that point home, here's another example. This might be the first instance of a person using a null hypothesis significance test. That was performed by John Arbuthnot, and he was trying to make an argument for the existence of God. And what he did was he looked at the birth records in the city of London for 70 or 80 years in the period where he lived. And it looked at, his assumption was that men, of course, being the go-getters they are, as people thought back in the day, they have to go out, right, provide food and expose themselves to all types of risks in so doing, whilst women would stay at home and do whatever, but be exposed to less risks than men. At least that's what Arbuthnot thought. So, given all those risks that we expose men to, men are more likely to die than women. So God, if he would exist, should provide for us and make sure that on a whole, more men are born on average than women. So he looked at the birth records and he saw a deviation from that 50-50 distribution under the null that you would expect if there were no difference in male-female birth rates. And he checked whether how likely that those results would be if the null were true. So if the true proportion men-women proportion of births were 50-50, then how likely would this result be more extreme? Well, very, very, very unlikely. So he thought God must exist. All right. So basically what's happening here is somebody rejecting a null hypothesis and concluding that therefore whatever he was thinking in advance must have been correct. In this case, somebody's concluding something about the existence of God because he's shown that if there were no difference in birth rate between men and women, his results or more likely would have been highly. His results or more extreme would have been highly unlikely. In a similar way, not related to the existence of God, but we've seen something similar in the research on being influenced by the future, right? In which somebody rejected a null hypothesis and on the basis of that concluded that therefore we must be influenced by stimuli from the future. The steps are the same, right? I have a statistical hypothesis, I look at the p-values, compare with an alpha level, I reject the null hypothesis, and I take that to mean that whatever I was thinking must be correct, whether it's the existence of God or stimuli from the future. But of course, it's not that simple, right? You can just, on the basis by using p-values, you can say, well, I play the devil's advocate, and if there was nothing going on, this would be highly unlikely. That's different from saying that my theory is basically right or the most likely to be correct compared with others. to be able to conclude the latter, you have to take more steps and make more comparisons and be more critical in your thinking, which is what we're going to do in this block. So, in this block, we're going to look at different aspects of reasoning about theory and different psychological constructs. And basically, today we're going to talk about how to do that with assumptions about causality. And you're going to cover the different related statistical techniques with Sharon on Thursday. And we're going to talk about individual differences and mechanisms, which is also related to critical thinking about causality on Friday. Basically, Friday, what we're going to do, if you're so inclined, if you want to join me for that, we're going to watch a recording of a lecture that was taught last year. So you can do what you like. You can just watch the recordings on your own. You could also join me for the live viewing of those recordings. And in so doing, you'll be able to ask questions in the chat or directly through Zoom to me. Yeah. Basically, would you be up for that live viewing, or would you just say, well, I can't be bothered and let me just watch the videos without the commentary? Let me know either in the Zoom chat. Commentary, live viewing would be good. Live viewing, so that's at least 4 people joining us. 5, 6. All right. Okay. Let's just do it, and we'll see how many people join us, and we can evaluate it as we go along. And if that turns out to be worth our while, then we can do the same thing next week. On Friday, we'll also have those recordings by a guest lecturer, and we'll do live viewing if it works out well this week on Friday as well. Those will be on the scheduled lecture time. Live viewing will be on the scheduled lecture time. All right. Next week, we're going to talk about how to apply those critical thinking skills to reasoning about psychological theory in the line of what we've just discussed. You're going to cover multiple regression with Sharon, again related statistical technique to what we'll be talking about on Tuesday. And we're going to talk about psychological constructs in the week after. So how do we reason about, given what we know about psychological measurements, how do we reason about the stuff we are supposed to measure? And we'll round things up with a critical perspective on everything we've been teaching you so far. So we're going to have a critical look at quantitative research and whether we're not better off doing qualitative research instead, as a final challenge to your assumptions in this course. Any questions about the schedule for this block?
Somebody said in the chat that your dates are wrong.
Oh, my dates wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah. Okay. I'll change them in the slides. I'm sorry. Yeah. All right. So ignore the dates. Basically, the schedule is right, but the dates are wrong. We're starting at the 27th, not the 29th. Thanks for that. Is it more reasoning or statistics this time? It's more reasoning than statistics this time. There are 6 lectures about the reasoning part and 4 about statistics. Which ones are the recording ones? The ones on this week on Friday and next week on Friday. This week's lecture, the Friday lectures recordings are already available in the modules. And for next week, I still have to edit them, but I'll add those as soon as possible.
How would you judge the difficulty of this block compared to the previous ones?
Well, I think I would expect it to be similar, basically. Whoa.
Okay.
Yeah, but of course, it's a different approach, right? So I think the readings are a bit more challenging. So that calls for, depending on what you've been doing in the past, a different approach, at least compared to the first block, right? The first block we used a book that was very accessible. Now we're using multiple sources. So there's a bit of a research article, a bit of a theoretical article, a bit of a book chapter. And I think you're best served, again, in scanning those reading materials just to get a gist of what you can read about, then attend the lecture, take your notes, use the structure in the lecture, and just look up the stuff you're uncertain about in the readings. So use the lectures as a guideline.